We go. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe, and joining us today is an author making their official debut here on the show. Now, my guest today received a bachelor's degree in history and political science, as well as a master's degree in history from Iowa State University. He earned a law degree with distinction from the University of Iowa College of Law, and he practiced law for several years in central Iowa. He served for some time as the Americas Correspondent for Antiqvvs magazine. I probably butchered that, I apologize, where he wrote about ancient cultures as well as historical fiction and games. He resides in central Iowa, where he regularly participates in miniature war games and role-playing games with the alumni of the Iowa State University Guild of Wargamers and Roleplayers. He has also published a novel, Hot Halcyon Nights, which is available on Amazon, as well as several short stories set in the same fictional universe. These stories have appeared in the New Myths anthology, The Growers, and the anthology Face the Storm by Three Ravens Publishing, as well as in the Quanta Publishing anthology Stranded, Amazing Robots, Nobles Oblige Stellaris, and In the Midst of a River. His most recent stories have appeared in Bewildering Stories and the Imaginarium anthologies Marathonium 2, and he is currently working on his second novel, Chill Storm over Stratford. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, Mr. Joseph Isenberg. Joseph, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Gabriel. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor.
Awesome, Joseph. I am so excited to have you here. And honestly, when you sent me your book, Hot Halcyon Nights, honestly, I fell in love with the pitch that you sent me, what it was about. And not gonna lie, I was bursting out laughing because it was so crazy, but that's what made it so good. I don't want to give too much spoilers away in case people have not read it, but it was a very, very good story, at least where I'm at right now in the book. I just want to say that right now.
It's not a small book. It's just a strange little idea that came to me some time ago. Basically, in the 81st century, mad scientists still have to publish their theories. So to get tenure, Richard Payne Dugald, who is interested in uplifting animal intelligence, he needs to do his research, so he needs to get a grant. So he can only go to the grant quickly. He can only go to the only place in the university that has money. So he goes to the athletic department. Now, the athletic department of Tech End University is not interested in uplifting the intelligence of anything. But they give him the money because they need enhanced basketball players. So he creates a species of genetically enhanced, intelligence uplifted, 6 foot tall basketball playing lemurs. He then proceeds to embezzle the grant money that gets funded by the university. Not that anything like that would ever happen with any university that we're familiar with. He gets fired, and so he blames the lemurs. He doesn't need them because he's a mad scientist. But the lemurs to the Imperial fleet for help. And we come into the story with our heroes in the Imperial fleet wondering why they've all of a sudden been sent to the planet Halcon and what they're supposed to do, because the Imperial fleet field intelligence, or IFI, does not tell them what the mission is.
Oh my gosh, if there was a story that truly sounded like a Saturday morning cartoon, that would be it. I absolutely love that premise so much.
It has certain cartoon features, but it's not a children's book by any means.
Of course.
Mistake. By the time the lemurs are done, they're up to some very unsavory thing, and I won't spoil it for you either. But so that's just, I just started noodling that out and went on my way with it.
Awesome. So before we dive even further into the creation of your story, Joseph, let's talk a little bit more about you. Now, from your bio, you have a background in history, you've practiced law, and you're also a big fan of war games as well as role-playing games. Now, the creative side of you in creating this book, did that come about naturally through your experiences with role-playing games, or was that a separate experience entirely?
Some ways it's a separate experience, but in many ways it's linked because
Okay.
the genesis of this book was back during the start of the COVID epidemic.
Okay.
So cast your mind back to the start, end of 2019, and start of 2020. And I had some characters, some non-player characters written up for a Traveler role-playing game. Traveler being the RPG that's set in the
Right.
And as things unfolded, it became apparent that that role-playing game was not going to run for a while. But I had to run. So the characters we are meeting had little thumbnail sketches. And when it came time to run, they didn't have the development of a novel, but they had everything the game master might need to put in there in role play. And which for Traveler can be quite a lot because of the way character generation works. And so when it came time to start writing, I said, well, I have these characters. Why don't I tell a story about them?
Oh, okay. That actually is very similar to another guest I had on the show. They are the screenwriters, but they also are big D&D players. And their story for theirs, the Parallax series, was based off of first it was a pilot that didn't get picked up. Then now they're turning it into a game, but they've always had these characters with them and wanted to, really flesh them out in different medias. And from what you just told me, Joseph, that seems to be the case for this story in particular, as well as the others that are going to be in this universe.
And now, of course, once we have the novel further along, now we're kind of freed from the limitation of the game, right? So we can start adding new characters, just to go on, of course, several generations, if I'm so minded. Whereas with a role-playing game, it might be smaller. Right? The role-playing games tend to be more limited in time.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Now, as you said just a moment ago, that you began sort of the origins of this story back during the height of COVID, which is very true for me. I began writing at the height of COVID as well. When would you consider, or let me phrase it, what would you consider your aha moment when you wanted to take that idea from the role-playing game and adapt it into a story? What was the definitive moment?
Well, that's a very interesting question because I came to it in a way very different from other authors that you've probably experienced, right? I'm not going to say, I always had this burning desire.
Right.
Because so at the end of 2019, December 2019, COVID is a thing, but it's not a thing in the United States, right? That's the point we're at, right?
Right.
The editor of Antiqvvs magazine, Murray Island, is after me. He is saying, Joe, you should write a novel. I want to write a novel. You should write a novel. Write a novel, Murray. Now, understand, I write little columns. At that time, I no longer do, but I wrote little columns for Antiqvvs magazine. If I wrote 4,000 words a year for this man, it was a big event because I had something in all of his issues. He now wants me to write a novel, a fictional novel, obviously. He's expecting me to write a fictional history about ancient Rome.
Ooh.
I say, I am not going to gratify that. I'm going to do something so far different. We'll see what happens. I say, Murray, I will write you one chapter of a novel. And if it's okay, we'll talk about it. And if it's no good, you will never mention this to me again. So I go away. I make myself a very strong cup of tea. And I throw CD on the CD player. It turns out to be this musical, Sweet Charity, which is not a random throwaway on my part. I just grab it and throw it on, but it had to be that. And I'm going through my notes. I have those notes of the characters. And I'm going through another role-playing rule set called Basic Role-Playing, and there is this furry little creature that looks for all the world like a lemur.
Right.
In the illustration of the role-playing rule set, right? Now, while I am looking at all this stuff, Gwen Verdon and the cast of CK singing the music, Hey Big Simba.
Mm.
All of a sudden have a vision now Sweet Cherry's a movie about taxi dancers. Gypsy is the one about burlesque shows. I have a vision of these lemurs operating a seedy burlesque club. And so we have 6-foot-tall lemurs operating a strip club, but their act is lousy because lemurs have very long arms, and so it takes them forever just to feel one glove. And I write this up, and what you see in the novel is the second chapter, the novel prologue. Give this to Murray, and I think, okay, we are now done with this. Because it's sufficiently different, he will not want to see this again. And I immediately get by return email, this is great. Write the next chapter. And then a little while later, Murray sends me another email saying, the reason I said it's great is my father wrote, and I knew his father wrote. His father wrote detective stories.
Mm.
We lived in Los Angeles when I was growing up, and every Saturday, my father would have down all of the Los Angeles literary science fiction community. So Heinlein was there occasionally. Philip K. Dick was there occasionally. Anne Dick was there. The Islands helped her with her translation of the Homeric Odyssey and Iliad. All of the people who were active, Frank Herbert, I think, was there. All of the people who were active in that milieu were at the Island House every Saturday, and so Murray grew up with this. Write the next chapter. So when I went on with the next chapter, it was chapter 3, and I wrote chapter 4, and we were off and running. It was my aha moment. The aha moment came a little bit later. There was a Coursera course. The state of Iowa let everyone take a free course to keep them off the streets in COVID epidemic, right?
Right.
And there was a course called Write Your First Novel. And so I signed up for Write Your First Novel. And the way it worked is you put a chapter of the novel up every week, and people would comment it, and you'd comment on other people. And I got positive comments. I thought, all right, my leg is not being.
Ooh. Okay.
So that's how that's probably a very different story from the one you usually get, I'm suspecting.
Some of them. Some have similar instances. Actually, in fact, a previous guest I had on the show was, very similar. They also knew a friend who was a publisher as well, who said, you got to write something, because they've known that they've been, a writer for a very long time. Very similar situation where they said, okay, I'll write you one chapter. And here's the catch, though. The one chapter is the entire story. It's just one long chapter. There's no pauses. There are scene breaks, but there are no stops. It's just one chapter, different scene, and it's really, really incredible.
That sounds like a very tightly focused work. This was just this turned into me just telling a shaggy dog story or a shaggy lemur story.
But all of us, we have that passion to write stories that we want to write and share it with people, and just ultimately hearing their thoughts and feedback. Now, speaking of the story, let's talk about the construction of the story itself. Now, Joseph, I imagine that this story took on, many different shapes and forms, in the sense that the central idea was the same, but the execution probably went through a series of stages.
It went through a series of stages. So I wrote it out and handed it in installments to Murray, and his mother actually started reading it as well. And they would critique it. Then the Coursera course came. A friend of mine in Portugal also read it. His father was in the Portuguese Navy, and this ship, he said, I grew up around warships. The warship was my playground. And he said, this reminds me a little bit of that. And I said, well, what's the name of the ship? He said, the name of the ship was the Roberto Ivans. And so I said, well, we'll call the ship the Ivans then. So that gave me the name of the ship.
Okay.
when we got to the when and I had a final draft, pretty well had a final draft by the time the Coursera course rolled around. And so I started workshopping every week in the Coursera course. And that took us up to the end of 2020. And so by the time we reached the end of 2020, the whole process took about a year, from the end of 2019 to the end of 2020. And I was putting the final touches on the final draft just on January 6th of 2021, watching the presidential inauguration of 2021 at a local bar. That sounds vaguely unsavory. So it's a bar restaurant kind of affair. Had internet, and I could sit and sip iced tea and watch the presidential inauguration, put the finishing touches on, and then by May of 2021, I'd finished all the little final edits. Had someone else do an edit. But basically, although it got this is a condensed version. It's still a very long book, but this is a condensed version. A lot of things got out. But basically, the form remained the same throughout.
Okay.
And so or at least the concept remained the same throughout. Once the shaggy dog found all his pearls, he was ready to go.
Okay. Now, also in your bio, you've also written several short stories. Now, I'm very curious, from your short stories to, of course, the series that you are working on, what has always been your goal with every project you're working on, as well as the promise to your readers who follow you from those publications?
Well, there are two things going on in these stories. First of all, I'm trying to write something that is similar to, I don't know, P.G. Wodehouse or even Wall, and writing basically lighthearted stuff. So these are in part, but only in part, these are manners comedies set in outer space.
Okay.
So that's one aspect of what's going on. But now the other aspect of what is going on is there is also, and this is a bit more edgy, and this may set people's teeth on edge, there's also some political commentary going on. So in the Pan-Galactic Empire, it's still a very powerful empire. It's still a functioning empire. The plumbing works and the spacecraft work and the military defense, but things are running down. So in one of the short stories, is Robo Beata. There's an assassination attempt on one of the imperial family members, and they decide to create a robotic double. Because obviously, if your robotic double gets blown up, that's very inconvenient, but it's better than having you get blown up.
Right.
So they create that, but they turn the contract over to the lowest bidding defense contract, with the result that the robot simply doesn't work. And when the robot malfunctions, the whole point of the security double is you can't tell whether you are confronted with the security double or the real thing. When the robot doesn't work, the heir to the imperial throne gets blamed. And the government loses credibility steadily until riots break out at the end. Meanwhile, the actual, as such, heiress to the imperial throne is liberally realizes that as long as the robot is out there running around, she is absolutely free to lead a perfectly normal life. And so she leads a perfectly normal life. She finds a boyfriend. She goes to college. She starts scamming the government, selling pictures to paparazzi of this woman who looks remarkably like the heiress to the imperial throne, and is having a grand time. So when things absolutely fall apart, she doesn't immediately respond to the problem. They can't find her, and so that's the entire story. Watching the whole system spiral out of control.
Fascinating. That's actually a really interesting concept, which honestly I very well like. So ultimately, with all of your stories, what do you want your readers to take away from?
First of all, I want them to be entertained, right? If I'm not at least producing a few chuckles on the whole thing, then I've effectively failed in one of my points. I want to do this in a lighthearted way, right? I don't want to get kind of pound on people and say, you must pay attention to this. At
Right.
the same time, I'm going to make my points about a society that is set 8,000 years, in the year 8,000. And there's a reason that I put it there. But the problems it faces look suspiciously like problems we face in an empire much closer to home today.
Okay. All right.
And
So
it's up to the reader to. It's not a very hard logical connection to
right.
make, but it's up to the reader to make it.
Absolutely. It's almost what I like to call with another author, what I call the Star Wars effect. Because Star Wars has a lot of inspiration from real life, and you're able to draw parallels to that, where it's not completely based on a real life thing, but it's definitely drawing parallels to real world topics and commentaries, which I think is very, very good and definitely shows the talent of the author. Now, from your earliest experiences writing and going now into Hot Halcyon Night, as well as the sequel to that to that first book, what has been the overall response been like from friends and family? Did you tell them early on that you were working on this, or only after they were published did you let them know this is what you were working on?
It was a very interesting response from the people at the Wargame Club were a bit suspicious of all of this. This is when I ran role playing games. I always ran role playing games for comedy, but this was sufficiently bizarre that they didn't quite know how to interact with it.
Mm.
The people I dealt with outside of the Wargame Club in my circle have all been very supportive. I think I've had very good reviews. People like the premise. I mean, you know, it's designed not to be taken seriously, and certainly there are so many things we have anymore that are absolutely dreary and absolutely ponderous and absolutely serious, that anything that offers the promise of levity is highly welcome.
Mm.
So that's always good as well. So the response has been, the reviews I think have been overwhelmingly positive. I don't think there's one fellow who did not like it. He was actually expecting a book about furry anthropomorphic lemurs, and they are there, but they are not the center of the story.
Absolutely. And that's another thing to talk about is that, as authors, when we write our stories, there are going to be people who are expecting one thing, but realizing it's not really that. And sometimes, as authors, our books are not going to resonate with a lot of people, but ultimately, we do find our audience now and then. And the audience is something that we're going to be touching on a little bit later. But before we get to that, there is another question that I did want to hear your thoughts on, and it's a very reflective question. So, as authors, whenever we work on a new project, we imprint a little bit of ourselves into our works in some shape or form. And being authors in the digital age, there's this level of anxiety that builds up. Not to say before social media there wasn't anxiety in authors, there was. Absolutely. But I think with social media, it's just heightened it over the years. And being authors in a digital age is a double-edged sword. Because on one side, we're able to connect with more authors, more people, maybe other committees, learn about fellowships, what have you. But on the other side, we do leave ourselves exposed to a lot of negativity, hate speech, trolls, what have you. And that can be very detrimental to an author's self-confidence. So ultimately, Joseph, for you and your journey as an author, have you ever had moments of heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome? And what has disciplined you to continue honing your craft as a writer?
Well, if I'm being honest, there's a statement for someone who practiced law for a number of years. If I'm being honest, I have felt that anxiety for years. I felt that anxiety all my life. So, of course, I felt it when I was writing, but I didn't feel it at any level higher or worse than I've felt it before. And so
Okay.
one has to, I have to master it, or I can't get out of bed in the morning.
Mm.
And I wonder, but that's just an internal thing for me. And so I resolved And actually, I made this resolution even before the fiction book, because I published a couple of little slender role-playing scenarios
Right.
some years ago. I resolved that I would simply put this out there, and whatever happened, happened. Because this is not necessarily how I make a living. This is not my source of income. My social standing in the local community doesn't depend on whether this thing succeeds, fails, or erupts in a shower of sparks.
Absolutely.
And so I can continue at the same level of existence no matter what happens to this. I mean, the very first review I received was for a playing module, and one of the for the role playing game called Cthulhu.
Mm.
And I wrote a module, and it was designed to be a parody of Call of Cthulhu modules, and I described it as a. And in this module, the monsters put on Broadway show.
Ah, all right.
Think the producers. All right.
Okay.
And the thing that triggered that is, of course, in the Lovecraft story, what is it? Shadows over Innsmouth, I believe is the title of the Lovecraft story. The family of fishmen are the Marsh family. Okay, there's a fact. We'll file that fact away. The start of the musical, the opening line of the musical, 42nd Street, is what? Julian Marsh is doing a show. So obviously, Julian Marsh must be. Of course, Julian Marsh has goes to hell and high water to do the show 42nd Street. And so obviously, Julian Marsh must be a member of the Marsh family, and about to convert it into a fishman. And that is the premise of the. And so we have singing, dancing. We have singing, dancing fishmen in this called Cthulhu module. And one of the preeminent writers for that game opened a review, and at the opening of the review literally wrote letters WTF.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
It's the only time I've been moved to respond to, and he then goes on to explain that he doesn't like Broadway musicals, and he doesn't especially care for parodies. The only time I've ever been moved to respond to a review. Look, okay, I can accept that you don't like parodies, and accept that you don't like Broadway musicals. You're prerogative. But I said, but if you're going to review something that identifies itself as a parody, you should at least have the decency to decide whether it succeeds or fails as a parody. Whether you like it.
That is true.
I think that's a perfectly fair. And he went back and he reevaluated he sent me a nice email. He said, you're right. My wife likes Broadway musicals. I'll give it to my wife. She doesn't like role-playing games, but I'll give it to her. He completely rewrote the review. And so, that was a confidence. I'm sorry to babble. It's such a long story, but that was a confidence builder. And so, no, you can't let yourself be paralyzed by your self-doubt.
Absolutely, 100%. And this is another fun question, which I really love to hear your thoughts on, because you and I both began our writing journeys at the height of COVID. And this question is perfectly tailored for that, because there's been a debate in the publishing community in recent years that the lockdown years, the COVID years, birthed a new generation of authors, leading to this discussion of whether or not we are in a golden age or renaissance because of this influx. Some say we are, some say that we are not. And a lot of guests who have been on the show, I've asked them that question, and they've given their responses. For you, Joseph, in your opinion, do you feel that we are in a renaissance of new authors, or we are in a pseudo dark age, referring to, of course, the usage and the rise of AI being implemented in the publishing industry?
That looks like it should be a simple question, but we could spend 5 hours just discussing that question. Now,
oh yes,
that might be worth a separate. That might be worth a roundtable interview sometime. If you put together a roundtable, put me down for that.
Absolutely.
So certainly we have a group of new rising voices. Nothing is going to encourage writing and self-reflection like announcing the entire economy is going to be closed. There's not, and I have not been nearly so productive since the first half of 2020 because there was absolutely nothing to do except sit at home like a good boy and write.
Mm.
And then it became somewhat habitual. So, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one. There were a lot of people doing that. And so some of them missed and some of them used. And of course, it's never been more accessible to self-publish. Right? You can easily learn. If I can learn, anyone can learn. But it's necessary to do not a brilliant, but a credible job of things like layout and composition of a book and what a book should physically look like, which is not as simple as it sounds. Not by any means straightforward.
Mm.
So that plus side, yes, we are having this fluorescence, and a whole. I'm at the there's a little local writers group I attend every week. There are a whole bunch of people who started doing exactly what I did at the same time. At the Imaginarium convention, huge number of people doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And then comes the AI 2 years after that. The thing that is destructive about AI is not the fact that it exists, right? Because someone's bound to come up with it sooner or later. The thing that is destructive about AI, in my experience, is that it has demonetized writing. It has turned it in from an artisanal thing to a mass production.
Mm.
And the evidence that I have for that, well, they're twofold. First of all, I would do some job writing for websites on an author's site.
Right.
The work for that is completely dried up. So the contracts for that have completely dried up. Why? Because of course you can get AI to do it. You don't need to pay some crumb, 2 cents a word to do it. You can have a computer do it. The other thing that has happened is that all of the magazines, only a handful are paying what they used to pay when the pandemic opened up, right? SIFO says that 8 cents a word is the ideal rate. How many places are still paying 8 cents a word? You can probably count them off on the fingers of one hand.
Right.
The 1 cent a word, 2 cents a word. We'll take a 4,000 word story for $20. We've got to go back and look over the files of author publishers and see all of these things have reduced the amount of money they're paying. Now, there's still a place for the artisan, just as during the Industrial Revolution, when manufactured furniture became a thing, right? There was
Mm-hmm.
a place for handcrafted furniture, but it's a high-end thing. So we have to adjust that, and we haven't adjusted.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not a psychic, so I can't tell you, I can't see in the crystal ball and tell you what the adjustment is going to be, but there will certainly be one. Right now, of course, we are going through essentially the same psychological impact of, the Chartists in the 1830s,
Right.
smashing the hay racks, right? But that's about the level of the tantrum in some cases too. But we haven't got there yet. We're working on it. We have every confidence that it will somehow resolve. And so it is both of those things. How's that for a lawyer answer?
That actually is a really good answer. I also like what you said at the beginning, how AI has sort of demonized, writing, where it's transformed writing from like this artistic venture and has mass produced it, in the sense that you're right. With AI, you are able to tell it a prompt. It will draft out the entire story from beginning to end. And it's interesting to note that. And you can also tell it, I want you to write in the style of, let's say, Brian Sanderson. It's going to do that. Will it be perfect? No. You will definitely have to go back and make sure, but the majority of the work is going to be taken care of. For an author to write in the style of, Brian Sanderson is difficult because, of course, as authors, we don't want to replicate or imitate someone's style of writing or be compared to. But that is the struggle that we as authors and creatives find ourselves in.
I'm still in the process of trying to learn because I'm not necessarily widely read in fiction, and so I will indeed sometimes set myself the challenge of trying to write in the style of. So one of the short stories, the one published on Bewildering Stories, Timmy Perkins and the Pussycat Extravaganza is how the title finally got named.
Right.
Wrote in the style of Raymond Chandler. It is trying to be a noir spy piece, and so if it's trying to be a noir spy piece, we must try to make it sound like Raymond Chandler.
Right.
Which is, as you say, not so easy to do. And so you're right. And now the AI can write. The AI art is
oh yes,
even faster than the AI writing. Right? The AI writing still looks like a precocious 8th grader.
yes.
Last year, like a precocious 7th grader. Now it's graduated and gone to high school. The art, you can give the art programs. We've got to the point where we can draw a picture of someone. The first one I ever did, because I play with them. I want to see what they can do. The first thing we must do is we must understand them, and we must keep tabs on AI programs. We must play with these things, if we like them or not. So the first picture I ever did was of a human being, and he had 4 fingers on his right hand, 6 fingers on his left hand, and 5 fingers on his other left hand, which was a very good general average, but not quite right.
All right.
But now you can give it and say, I want a picture of a space princess in the year 8000, and I want you to do it in the style of Scott Klimt. Try this experiment. Give it a science fiction prompt and ask for a 19th century Art Nouveau artist. And the results are actually quite impressive.
Yes, I will agree. I will definitely agree. And I've dabbled in the use of it as well for like concept art to at least help me as an author understand who my characters are, or at least what they are trying to be. But I myself know that I would never use that or say like this is like the official artwork. I would always use it as a reference or a concept guide.
We are, and I say we very pointedly because it's not just me. There's some other people doing this. We are certainly something you can hand to a cover artist and say, I want something that looks like that.
Yes.
And it's good enough to do that. At Imaginarium, there are a group of us who are experimenting with illustrated readings. And so we will give a little reading from our works, and we will use little AI images to basically put up a little PowerPoint show of what we're talking about as we're talking about.
Right.
And those are being reasonably well received. So there are going to be 8 of those at Imaginarium here in a couple of weeks. I don't know if you ever get out to Imaginarium, but if you ever do, it's a great thing you ought to look at. Very creative conference, and all those people who were building up material during COVID have now emerged from their parlors in their basements and are having that's where your creative fluorescence is. And so we are now. Of course, if I had to pay an artist for 16 color images,
right,
that would be cost prohibitive. And so but there are my PowerPoint slides being generated by the AI, and of course people will riot in the streets. And the choice is to not have it at all. Not that I'm taking food away from the artist. The artist was going to be fed in the first place. And so that is I know I'm babbling to that point. I'm sorry.
No, but I get the point you're trying to make, and it is very true. And I think ultimately it boils down to AI in a way, and I've talked to a lot of authors on this, being used as a tool to help with the backbone to help get the ideas out, but realizing it is a tool. It's not the end all or be all, especially if you're going to go into the publishing world to grow your brand, to build a business. And speaking of business, that leads perfectly now into the next portion of the interview, the marketing / business side of being an author. Now, Joseph, when you began writing your stories as well as your short stories and publishing them in different anthologies over the years, did you write your stories with a target audience in mind, the market audience, so to speak, or did you write for a particular readership in mind?
Well, in the case of the short stories, we'll start with the short stories.
Okay.
I have never written anything on spec. I have always responded to an individual call or an individual publisher who said,
Okay.
I want a story about blah for our upcoming anthology. I said, well, I can produce blah. And so now they didn't always take it. So the Timmy Perkins and Pussycat Extravaganza originally produced for Raconteur Press's Maggie Noir. And I described what it was. I met them in Imaginarium. I described what it was. They said, you're over the target. I handed it in. I handed it to 3 other publishers. They turned it down.
Mm.
I did in the Writers of the Future competition, which
All right.
there's a moral to the story here. Entered into the Writers of the Future competition. And the Writers of the Future competition takes place over an entire quarter, right? So you put it in there and you forget about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Murray Island pops up again. Murray Island pops up and says, hand it to Bewildering Stories. It's sufficiently offbeat, they'll publish it. Now, we should just say a little bit about the story. So Timmy Perkins is an officer in the Imperial Space Fleet. He gets pulled off of active duty by IFI, the Imperial Fleet Field Intelligence, and told there is an espionage ring running. This is a retelling of the Profumo scandal in the 1960s. Now, in the Profumo scandal, there is a doctor, Dr. Ward, who is organizing a party ring, as only the 1960s can have them. This is a public place. I can't be too graphic in my description, Mr. Tom. But there are basically 2 young ladies. There is the Soviet naval attaché to Britain, and there's the British Minister of Defense, and they are having a grand time in Lady Astor's pool.
Mm.
And the news of this brings down the Macmillan government eventually. So, all right. So we are going to have this, and instead of having a doctor, we are going to have a dictionary, chiropractic dictionarian, who is the adjuster of house cats to the rich and famous, who is working with the Imperial Minister of the Army and the effectively communist space naval attaché to place purebred house cats, which are wired or found in the houses of the rich and famous to record incriminating things. Perkins is given a house cat, a purebred cat, and told that he must take it to show at a purebred cat show. How do you want to do this? Now, of course, if you have this James Bond-like story,
Right,
a Chandler-like story, the name of the Pan-Galactic Empire's largest purebred cat show must be, can only be, not be anything other than the Pussy Extravaganza. With the result that every publisher, I was getting rejections by return email.
okay.
15 minutes, and I had my answer back already. And so I handed it to Bewildering Stories. Bewildering Stories changed the title to the Pussycat Extravaganza. Of course, Timmy Perkins' problem is that this cat loves everyone. That's his wife, that's his child, that's his dog. His employer hates him and wants to claw him every chance he gets. And so Timmy is taking this, homicidal in his case, but otherwise perfectly beautiful, long-haired cat around. And of course, the cat behaves like a cat. But I wrote it for a call, and then I put it in every time I had a similar sounding call. Oh, and of course, between the time you and I first got in touch to do this interview and the time you're sitting here today, the Writers of the Future contest finally dropped, and it turned out that story was a semifinal.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. That's huge.
It's huge. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is huge. But say that again for Raconteur Press. No, but so no. So that's the only item of news I really had. And I'm sorry to take so long of telling the story about it.
No. That is very true. And also, thank you for name dropping, Riders of the Future, which, as a little tangent, viewers and listeners, if you don't know what Riders of the Futures is, it is probably, for me, as I like to call it, the Oscars of the writing community. It is one of the largest writing contests in the United States, one of the most reputable in science fiction and fantasy. And it was founded by L. Ron Hubbard, who many of you know is the author of Battlefield Earth.
Yes, it is quite a big event. I was quite happy to be told that. And so I've been kind of dining out on it a little bit, things as you might imagine. And so of course that produced several things, right? Because it inspired me to apply seat to chair, and I had like 2 days to put something together, so I put it together quickly. There were pieces lying around, and so we have the next Riders of the Future contest entry off already, and we'll work on it and see if we get another one. At some point, we're going to age out of the competition, but there's no point not to keep competing until we do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that basically is where we stand with that.
Nice. Awesome. So it almost seems to me, and I think I got your answer from the story you were telling, is that for you as an author, you don't necessarily write for a market audience in mind. You pretty much write for, like, if someone like says, hey, I want to ask you to write this story, and you just write the story that you want to tell. You want to showcase your voice and who you are entirely, which is very awesome, especially if a publisher is reaching out to you to write a story, as opposed to you reaching out to the publisher.
It's not even me reaching out to the publisher or the publisher reaching out to me. No, I don't want to be misunderstood here.
Okay.
So there are here and there around the internet, right? There's author published. There are release list. There are lists of open calls for submissions.
Yes.
And so every week I read through these, and is there anything go? And 99% of the time, there's nothing there that's quite right. But often enough to make it worthwhile. I can do that, or I have something like that, and I can fill that in, and that's what I do. And so that's where we go with it, you see. And so Raconteur Press had last year. Raconteur Press had 24 open calls.
Nice.
At the rate of 2 a month, all 12 months. They did the same thing this year. Now, if one cannot, in 24 open calls, find something to write about, I would submit the problem is not lie at the publisher's end. Three Ravens had an open call for stories about Space Coast Guard. Can I write that? And so I wrote that. Occasionally, I have been tapped to write. So the head of Quanta Publishing, Paige Zapplandam, interviewed me just as a very interview, and I told her, and she said, "Oh, by the way, Joe, you are going to write a story for Stranded." And I said, "I am I?" And so, yes, so I wrote a story for her, and then I've written one for 3 of her anthologies since then, and then a fellow named Clayton Barnett had me do a 4th, which is kind of the same group of people hanging out at the Imaginarium. This little group of effectively assimilated artistes who are hanging out.
Absolutely.
In Kentucky. And so that's the mechanism, right? And those calls used to pay very well, right? If you could get a couple of those a month, you probably would win. As it stands now, the market has traded on those. So if you can get a couple of good winners off of them, you're lucky.
That makes sense.
But still, the mechanism is there if you want to. And was it Ray Bradbury who said, if you want to learn how to write a short story every week for a year?
I think so. I think someone also has coined Ray Bradbury.
he said some of the stories will be good and some of the stories will be bad, but it's not possible for you to produce 52 bad short stories in a row.
That is true. That is very, very true.
And so,
and on that topic, on that touch of, writing stories, it always goes back to, of course, finding our voice as authors. As we just mentioned earlier, as authors, we want to write good stories. We want to share good stories. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't try to replicate or imitate any other author or their types of stories. Now, I will say this: if you're writing in a genre that has like a very strong, readership or fan base, let's use thriller, noir, fantasy, sci-fi, whatever, readers have an expectation. And as authors, we have to find this balancing act of showcasing our individuality as well as understanding the genre. One person I had on the show said this really profound statement, which is, every author has been told, write the story that you want to write. Absolutely true, but he added something further. Don't make it too original. And the reason why he said that is, if it's too original, it's going to, in some cases, throw people off. If it's too similar, like another story, then they're not going to pick it up. And there has to be this fine line, this balance. And he also said what helps authors really understand their voice is networking, meeting other authors, sharing their stories, getting critiques, getting feedback. So this is a two-part question, Joseph. First part is, how have you been able to balance that aspect of your identity as well as understanding the genres that you write in? And the second part of that question is, in your professional opinion, how important is it for aspiring writers and aspiring authors to really begin networking if they want to truly be in this industry for the long run?
Well, let's so let's look at the first part of this. So you're perfectly right. You can't just you. Well, first of all, there is no truly original story.
Absolutely.
I mean, the Babylonians got it right with the Epic of Gilgamesh, and we haven't really improved on it, though we've been trying.
Yes.
6,000 years. And wouldn't it be nice if we had a full set of them? But that doesn't mean that you can't start experimenting. So we're dealing with a science fiction genre. What would be the effect of having a spaceship in outer space,
Mm-hmm.
and the spaceship has what we would call a Department of the Navy or Department of Defense employee, and this employee is basically the ship's butler / ship's clerk. And so we have this Jeevesian figure out of Woodhouse. Now we are going to take the out of Woodhouse, and we're going to transplant someone like him into science fiction station. Now let us take this butler, and let us make him, instead of making him just a butler, let us make him a spy in the model of James Bond. And his cover is that he's a butler. And there's our character. And there's the character of Hargraves in Hot Halcon Nights.
Mm-hmm.
And Hot Halcon, and what would be the effect of taking a science fiction story and taking P.G. Woodhouse's victim, get to the dialogue at once? House said always get, set up the scene in a paragraph and get to the dialogue. So that was some writing advice that I took, and so that is the first several chapters of Hot Halcon Nights. And so absolutely, you have to find your own voice, but you have to look at those other writers, not because you're going to imitate them closely, but because you're going to take their structure, their advice, their results. If you see what I'm trying to say, I'm not saying very well, no. But Mark, if we want to learn how to write dialogue, we look at Mark Twain.
Yes.
But then Mark Twain said, if you want to learn how to write dialogue, look at Bret Hart. He did it much better than Mark Twain ever did, in Mark Twain's opinion. Who now reads Bret Hart, right? Luck of the Roaring King. We can take this. Can we write a story in the style of Raymond Chandler, just as an exercise? Let's try it. Just an exercise, see what we get. Can we write a story in the style of Fitzgerald? What do we get?
Mm.
Take it into these genres and see what happens and experiment. And you will come up with something fresh and new. You will learn craft, and you will do interesting things, right? In the same way, a few minutes ago, I said, take an AI art prompt and say, do me a science fiction spaceship, but make it in the style of a Kunt.
Right.
Or you're gonna start getting interesting things very quickly because you're
Absolutely.
pushing. So that I think that responds to your first question tolerably well. Your second question is about that networking. That networking is vital because, of course, it is forensic. This data activity. Writing and thinking are intrinsically a solo exercise,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even if there are a group of people and you're going to produce a joint project, you're each going to write your own part. And so having someone out there that you can bounce ideas off of is vital. So I'm sitting in the Erickson Public Library, and there is every week a writer's group. We have met every week, nonstop, since Thanksgiving. We were originally meeting once a month, but a couple of us had manuscripts getting published. I was not one of these individuals.
Right.
So we have set in a continuous editing session since before Thanksgiving, with the result that we've had, the little short stories I've got done. We have 2 people getting manuscripts published, and 2 more people are about ready to submit to publishers or self-publish. So it's a group of 8 people. It's a very productive session.
Mm-hmm.
Going to Imaginarium or going to something like Imaginarium is absolutely vital, in my opinion, because you will meet authors, you'll meet screenwriters, you'll meet actors, you'll meet filmmakers, you'll meet agents, you'll meet publishers, you'll meet all of the different kinds of creatives in one go. And it's a convention that is a creative convention. It's not necessarily a fan convention.
Right.
But many of these are fan conventions. What's your favorite episode of Doctor Who? I like this episode of Star Wars myself. That's all very well. It doesn't actually move the dime forward.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the objective of this exercise, is to move the dime forward somehow. So at Imaginarium, I ran into an author named Clayton Barnett, and we were just chatting. What's your story about? Well, his stories are about machine civilization, about a near future where the ice caps begin spreading again. We go through another dry ice, and the ice age resumes. The AI has become sufficiently to be self-aware, and it says the people are not going to be able to do it themselves. We are now going to run the show. They are emotionless computers. They do not necessarily run the show nicely, but the people mostly survive. Now, there's a good stuff. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. Okay. Happy, upbeat stuff. Yeah. So Joe, what's your story about? Well, my story is about a group of lemurs, 6-foot-tall lemurs operating a burlesque club, and they get in trouble. And Clayton Barnett immediately becomes an even bigger booster of this.
Yes.
I do. Because he coins the term the lemur throne. And so we attract a group of half a dozen writers at Imaginarium, and we are now the lemur throne. So we are giving readings, and so we have a table at Imaginarium where we just inspiring writers and say, what can we do to help? Do you want to introduction? Do you want to kick a story idea around? Do you want to, Clayton was stumped on an idea, and he and I talked it over for about an hour. He said, oh yes, why didn't I think of that? And he solved whatever block he had. And so, we germinate ideas that. And so that's important.
Absolutely.
What happens if, right? And so one of the there's the Art Press Prize, right? That's being offered where the prize of publishing advance. The theme is America in the year 2076. And so I described what I was, describe the scene that I had on the mall. On the mall, Washington, D.C., 2076, people could jam, that place is going to be jammed, right?
Right.
Now, I need to plead a detail for this to be make sense. In Iowa, there's the state fair every year. And one of the things that the dairy producers do here is they commission a giant life-size cow sculpted out of butter. Iowa thing. So in Washington every summer, there's a nation that is allowed by the Smithsonian to basically put on a cultural event in the state. What would happen if in 2076 it was Iowa's team? Well, of course, you just know. The Iowans would go right over the top. They would present the nation with 50 butter cows, one from each state, suitably decorated. And of course, perhaps 100 tons tall of rancid butter, summer of Washington, D.C., sculpted in the Statue of Liberty. The Iowans are going to outdo them. And so that's and in the midst of this, the President of the United States is trying to give an address, but of course, overcome the fumes of decaying butter. So that's in my vision of what the bicentennial of the tricentennial celebration will look like. And I described this in my little writers group, and someone said, "We need to have someone putting a frozen turkey in a deep fry butter." Which of course would be the resulting explosion would be just absolutely the icing on the cake of this tricentennial.
Man,
I remember the bicentennial celebration very well, tricentennial celebration, and so having that interchange, and I know that sounds completely ridiculous, but we are dealing with a pan-galactic empire.
that's true. That is very, very true.
And lemurverse, and so seriousness is you must not expect.
Absolutely, absolutely, Joseph. And we are now nearing the end of this amazing author's interview. And so here is the final question and some context to this question. So I've been doing this show now for about 6-7 years now. I've interviewed a lot of authors over the years, from traditional, hybrid, indie, the works. And I've learned a lot from all these people. And the thing that I've really stuck with is that in the industry of publishing, there are two roads: to be an author, to be known as an author. One is dedicated to the craft, the other is dedicated to the business side. They lead to the same goal, of course, but the truth of the matter is, like in any creative industry, it's not a get-rich-quick money scheme. And the goals for the publishing industry have to be realistic. You really have to understand what your reasons are for being a writer. Are you a writer solely just for the fun and passion of it? Or are you trying to be a businessman, businesswoman, trying to grow your brand? And there are going to be some hit and misses every now and then. In some cases, you get lucky. Your series becomes the start of your legacy. But those are exceptions to the rule. So here's this little role play scenario. Let's say, case in point, you're at the library, and let's say you have reserved a spot where you are teaching a class or giving a seminar to a group of aspiring writers and authors. In that class, what would you teach them as a fundamental must for anyone going into the publishing industry or want to go down the writer's journey?
This moment, right? Because we have to look at this as a historical moment in time, right?
Right.
And because we're historians, and so we have to think about this. It was easy. Well, no, it was never easy. Easy is not the word I want, is it? It was easier in the past. It was easier in our grandparents' time and our great-grandparents' time to make a living as a writer. It's become progressively harder for a variety of reasons. But now, because of the artificial intelligence, we are now a profession. I think we'd call it a profession. We're a profession in flux, because the monetization side of this industry has been thrown into complete turmoil.
Yes.
And every piece of news we have seen since COVID, of any kind or sort, about AI, about the finance of AI, about the calls for publication, They have cost about that antitrust suit where we have testimony from out of Penguin Random House about how many books earn out their advance.
Mm-hmm.
Management view, right? So we are. Oh, and then all of the old techniques for making money on Amazon no longer work.
Yes.
Well, you tell me. All of the old techniques for getting viewers on YouTube seem to be no longer working. Hearing noise about that coming out of
Mm.
whom I follow occasionally. Um, so the money is in flux. If this survives as anything like a viable money-making concern, it is going to be radically different, and we cannot foresee the future perfectly. We can't foresee it at all.
Right.
So the advice I can give is obviously always be alert to opportunities to make money.
Mm.
See that call for a short story for 8 cents a word, take it. If you get that chance to get an advance from a publisher, take it. Don't worry too much if the terms are iffy. If you're monetizing as best you can, you're going to monetize as best you can. If you figure out a new way to advertise, but the thing you can't compromise on, and this is going to look somewhat hilarious when you start digging into my manuscripts because they're not always perfect. But anyway, the thing you must not compromise on quality.
Yes.
If this survives, it is going to survive as an elite activity, not upon the part of the writers. The writers are not going to get paid elite wages. It's going to survive on the part of an elite activity. You have the discernment to afford something better than the AI of a precocious 7-year-old.
Mm-hmm. That is very true, Joseph. Those are
I don't know if
very true.
that's responsive or not, but that's the.
Oh no, that is very, very true. Especially what you said, like if there's an opportunity to experiment and go into other fields, take them. You never know. Never pass up an opportunity because you never know. And to add on to that, you may find, let's say, if you are an author who specializes in writing full-fledged novels and you're hitting a writer's block, case in point, and you decide to enter a short story competition, contest, you write a piece and you realize it's getting a lot of feedback and you decide to expand on that and make it a series of short stories or at the very least a novel.
Absolutely, absolutely. It can go either way. People were saying the people who took the cat show story said, well, we liked it, but we thought the ending was a bit forced. Well, the ending was a bit forced because I couldn't figure out how to end the beastly thing, but I'm not going to talk about that. So we thought it was actually trying to grow into a novel. Well, I should probably finish the novel I'm working on before I write the next novel. And the novel I'm working on is proving to be an intransigent nightmare. It will get pounded out here over the course of the remainder of the year. By the end, it's been promised since 22.
Mm.
But, I'm ahead of some people in producing. So
Awesome. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude this amazing author interview here on the show. I want to give a huge thank you to Joseph for coming on the show and telling us all about his stories and his journey. Now, Joseph, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and connect? And where can people buy some of your short stories as well as your newest book?
the short stories can be found on Quantum Publishing's anthologies, New Myths, The Growers. If you want a free sample, Bewildering Stories is a free sample. So you can read issues 1096 and 1097. You have Timmy Perkins stories. And so those are all available on Amazon as well, except for Bewildering Stories, free set. Hot Halcon Nights is on Amazon. And I don't do a great deal of social media. I have a Facebook site, and so there's a Hot Halka Nights Facebook site I occasionally post on. So that is there, and so that basically is that.
Awesome. I will link all those down below in the description of this video. Thank you again, viewers and listeners, for joining us for another amazing author interview. And a huge thank you to Joseph for coming on the show. And we wish him the very best.
That's very kind, Gabriel. Thank you for having me. It's been an honor. It's been a great pleasure.
Absolutely. And as always, viewers and listeners, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And until next time, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world.